At first, the family thought the house was just old. Pipes knocked, wood creaked, the walls made quiet sounds at night. But soon, the noises began to move from room to room, following them. And that's when they realized whatever was inside the walls wasn't part of the house. It was aware. It all began when the Thompsons moved into their old Victorian house on the outskirts of a quiet suburban town in upstate New York. From the moment they stepped inside, there was an unsettling feeling, a kind of cold presence that seemed to watch them from the corners of each room. At first, they dismissed it as the creaks and groans of an old house settling into winter, but soon, strange things began to happen. Footsteps in the hall when no one was there, whispers that vanished when they tried to listen closely, and objects that moved on their own. Emma, the youngest daughter, claimed she saw a shadowy figure lurking just beneath the walls, peering out through cracks like it belonged there. Her parents chalked it up to imagination, but the feeling of being watched intensified with every passing night, and soon the house no longer felt like a home, but a cage. And then came the first scratches, tiny but deliberate along the walls, almost like nails against plaster. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with an unseen presence, and each night Emma whispered that she lives in the walls, words her parents thought were the product of a child's fear, until the walls themselves began to answer. The nights grew longer, darker, and somehow heavier, as if the very air inside the house had turned against the Thompsons. Emma's whispers about the presence in the walls became louder, more insistent, and she would wake in the middle of the night, pointing to empty corners, eyes wide with terror, murmuring that the woman was watching her. Her older brother, Jake, tried to rationalize it, blaming shadows and tricks of the light, but even he began to notice things, soft tapping behind walls, like someone gently knocking to get attention, and the occasional low sigh that seemed to drift from the floorboards themselves. Their parents started finding scratches etched into the wallpaper, jagged and erratic, often forming crude shapes or symbols they didn't understand. The family dog refused to enter certain rooms, growling at walls that appeared perfectly solid, and at times the temperature would drop so sharply that their breath fogged in the middle of the living room. At first, they thought it was just old pipes or drafts, but the incidents became impossible to ignore, and one night, Emma screamed bloody murder, claiming she saw a pale, hollow-eyed woman peeking from behind the plaster, her face pressed against the wall as if she had always been trapped there. The Thompsons were forced to face a terrifying truth. They were not alone, and whatever lived inside the walls was growing bolder, more daring, as if it had waited decades for someone to move in and finally give it a voice. Days turned into weeks, and the presence in the walls grew increasingly hostile. No longer content to remain hidden in whispers or scratches, it began to interact with the Thompsons in ways that were impossible to ignore. Doors that were firmly shut would swing open on their own. Lights flickered violently, even when circuits were stable, and Emma reported hearing faint voices calling her name in tones that twisted between pleading and malicious. One evening, while the family sat in the living room, the walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly, as though something pressed from the inside, trying to push out. Jake, desperate for proof, pressed his ear to the cold plaster of Emma's bedroom wall and froze, hearing a soft, raspy laughter that didn't belong to anyone he knew, followed by a faint whisper, "I see you." Their parents tried to reinforce the walls with nails and patches, but every repair seemed temporary. Within hours, scratches reappeared, deeper and more deliberate, as if the thing inside was marking its territory. The air grew thick and suffocating at night, carrying a musty, metallic scent, and Emma began drawing frantic sketches of a gaunt, hollow-eyed woman trapped inside the walls, always watching, always waiting. Sleep became impossible for the family, and the oppressive presence started seeping into their waking hours. The scratching never stopped, and faint murmurs followed them from room to room. It was no longer a child's imagination or an overactive pet. The Thompsons were living in a house that had become a vessel for something old, angry, and trapped,
and the line between their home and a nightmare was dissolving with every passing day.
By now, the Thompsons were living in constant fear, their home no longer a sanctuary, but a cage that seemed alive with the woman who dwelled in the walls. Emma refused to enter certain rooms, claiming she could feel her presence pressing through the plaster, and sometimes she would scream in the middle of the night, flailing at walls that seemed to respond to her fear with sharper, louder scratches. Jake, trying to confront the entity, hammered on the walls one evening, demanding it show itself, only to hear a hollow, echoing cry that seemed to come from all directions at once, shaking the windows and rattling the dishes. Their parents, exhausted and terrified, began to hear their own names whispered softly, almost lovingly, before the tone shifted to anger and menace, and objects would fall from shelves without cause. The family tried everything: religious rituals, charms, even calling in local paranormal investigators, but nothing could penetrate the walls or calm the relentless presence. One night, Emma awoke to find faint handprints smeared across the plaster, perfectly formed but impossibly small, and in the dim light, she swore she could see the outline of a woman crouched behind the wall, as though ready to step out at any moment. Sleep deprivation and fear warped the family's perception of reality. Even the quietest moments were filled with a sensation of being watched, of tiny movements behind the walls, of whispers that promised they would never leave. It became clear to the Thompsons that the woman was not just a spirit trapped within the walls. She had become the walls, the house itself a living, breathing entity that fed on their terror, and every attempt to escape only seemed to draw her closer, tightening the invisible grip she had always held, waiting patiently for the moment she could finally emerge. The incidents became unbearable, and the Thompsons could no longer ignore the reality that their home was no longer theirs. It belonged to the woman in the walls. Objects didn't just move, they flew across rooms, shattering against walls with terrifying precision, leaving jagged cracks and splinters where none had existed before. Emma's drawings now covered the walls, depicting the gaunt, hollow-eyed woman reaching through cracks, crawling out of door frames, and her sketches seemed to change overnight, the images more detailed and sinister than before. One night, Jake awoke to a whispering that crawled along the baseboards, a low, grating voice that promised, "You cannot leave, I am here." When he shone a flashlight on the walls, he saw tiny finger marks pressing from the inside, indentations that moved and shifted as if the woman was breathing beneath the plaster. The parents, desperate for answers, attempted to call a psychic, but the line went dead, replaced by a chilling laughter echoing from every corner of the house. Sleep became impossible. The family drifted in a haze of exhaustion and terror, seeing shadows move where there were none, and hearing the unmistakable sound of scratching that followed them from room to room. Emma began speaking in a voice that was not entirely her own, murmuring secrets and threats in a language the family couldn't understand, and every time she did, the walls responded, creaking, cracking, and sometimes bleeding a dark, almost black liquid that smelled of iron and decay. It was no longer a haunting. They had become prisoners of something ancient, something patient, something that had always existed within the house, waiting for a family naive enough to move in, giving it life once again, until the day it could step fully out from the walls and into the world. By this point, the Thompsons were barely functioning, their days consumed by fear and their nights by an unrelenting presence that seemed to anticipate every move. Emma's once bright demeanor had vanished, replaced by a pale, haunted expression, and she often sat in corners, rocking back and forth, whispering to the walls as though they were answering her. Jake tried to record the strange occurrences, but cameras would malfunction or footage would disappear, leaving only silence where the terrifying sounds had been. One night, as their mother checked the laundry room, she heard the unmistakable sound of fingernails scraping the inside of the walls, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second until it became a deafening crescendo, and then a cold hand pressed against her back, though no one was there. Their father attempted to leave the house, but every exit seemed to vanish. Doors led to hallways that weren't supposed to exist, and windows revealed only darkness, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself had expanded, trapping them inside. Emma began screaming that the woman was angry because they had tried to ignore her, that she had lived too long in the shadows to be dismissed, and as she spoke, the walls shivered and groaned, revealing faint outlines of a face, hollow eyes
eyes glaring, watching, judging. The family realized in bone-deep horror that the entity had grown beyond the walls, its presence saturating the very air, the floors, the ceilings. Every inch of the house was alive with her.
The nights grew unbearable, and the Thompsons' sanity began to fray under the constant pressure of the entity that lived within the walls. Emma refused to leave her room, claiming the woman could follow her anywhere in the house, and her whispers had turned into pleading warnings. "She's coming for us." Jake tried to confront the phenomenon directly, pounding on walls and shouting, but the responses were immediate and cruel. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, small cracks spreading like veins, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that echoed through the house. One evening, their father discovered strange footprints along the hallway, bare, small, and impossibly human-looking, yet they appeared and disappeared as though the person who left them had melted back into the walls. The family dog had vanished, its collar hanging from a ceiling beam, and no trace of the animal remained. Emma began speaking in the woman's voice, recounting horrifying events that had allegedly occurred decades ago, of a life trapped inside the house, betrayed and abandoned. Her anger and grief crystallized into a single malevolent presence. Objects now flew across rooms without warning. Doors slammed with such force that the walls shook, and windows rattled even when there was no wind. The family could feel her watching constantly, eyes unseen but heavy on their back, and they realized the horrifying truth. The woman had claimed the house. Its walls were her flesh, its air her breath, and they were merely temporary occupants in a prison she controlled completely. Panic became instinctive. Every sound was a warning, every shadow a threat, and the realization settled in with icy certainty. Escape was no longer possible because the house itself had fused with the horror, and the Thompsons were caught inside the body of something far older, far crueler, and far more patient than they could ever imagine. By now, the Thompsons were living in a constant state of terror, every moment a battle to maintain a shred of sanity as the house itself seemed to breathe and shift around them. Emma rarely spoke to anyone anymore, instead whispering warnings to walls that would answer in soft, almost imperceptible murmurs, as if the woman inside were teaching her some dark language of the trapped and the damned. Jake began noticing strange reflections in mirrors, shapes moving behind him that vanished when he turned, shadows with hollow eyes that mimicked his movements with a delay that was almost too deliberate to be coincidence. The parents tried reasoning with each other, trying to find some logical explanation, but even the most mundane things betrayed them. The air seemed thicker in certain rooms, the temperature dropping to freezing in patches that moved unpredictably, and furniture would shift overnight into positions that blocked exits or created new corridors that led to nowhere. One night, Emma screamed that the woman was angry because they had laughed at her, and the walls responded violently, groaning and cracking as if straining to break open. The ceiling lights flickered violently, throwing the house into near darkness, and for a fleeting moment they saw her, a pale, hollow-eyed woman, her face pressed against the plaster, moving slowly as if testing the limits of her confinement. Every corner of the house seemed alive with intent. The floors would creak as if footsteps approached from inside, yet no one was there. The Thompsons understood the horrifying truth. They were no longer in a home, but inside a living entity, one that had waited decades for new occupants, and now that it had them, it would not release them willingly. Fear became a physical weight, pressing against their chests, and they realized that every night that passed, the woman inside the walls was growing stronger, bolder, and closer to stepping fully into the world. The Thompsons were no longer just afraid. They were trapped in a waking nightmare where every inch of their house had turned against them. Emma's whispers had grown into frantic warnings, her small hands shaking as she traced shapes on the walls that no one else could see, claiming the woman was planning something, that she had grown impatient after decades of waiting. Jake tried to record the activity, hoping to capture proof, but every device failed. Cameras froze on static, phones drained instantly, and even the batteries in flashlights burned out as if consumed by an unseen force. Their parents were now living in terror of the shadows, seeing fleeting glimpses of a pale figure moving behind closed doors or catching a reflection in a window that wasn't their own. Objects didn't just move, they hurled themselves across rooms with force, smashing walls and breaking furniture, leaving splintered chaos in their wake, while faint scratching noises crept along the ceiling and floors, following them from room to room. One night, Emma awoke screaming, insisting the woman had pressed her face against the bedroom wall while she slept, whispering threats.
thoughts that chilled her blood. The family dog, which had once been a loyal companion, was never seen again, though they occasionally heard its whimpering echo from within the walls. The Thompsons were forced to accept that their home was no longer theirs. It had become a living, malevolent organism, the woman inside its walls fully aware of their fear, feeding on it and growing stronger with each terrified heartbeat. Every glance, every shadow, every whisper reminded them they were no longer visitors, they were prisoners, and the woman's patience had nearly run out.
The house had become a prison, a twisted maze of fear and shadows, and the Thompsons could no longer tell where the walls ended and the woman began. Emma's once innocent face was now pale and drawn, her eyes wide and unblinking as she whispered secretly. The house was searched from top to bottom. No hidden rooms, no tunnels, no signs of life. Officially, it was declared empty, but neighbors say that at night, the walls still make the same scratching sounds, the same whispers, the same slow breathing. And sometimes, if you stand close enough, you can hear something on the other side, listening, waiting, because whatever lived in those walls didn't leave. It learned how to stay quiet.